I'm excited to look at some new strategies for reading our story, Schooled, more closely. And today I want to introduce you to notice and note strategies. And what I mean by notice and note strategies is, as readers, we should be taking notice of what we're reading and noting the interesting peculiarities, the differences that we see, to help us get a richer understanding of our story. It might help us understand the theme, the character's motivations, what the plot is, the author's message, and so on. So, as a reader who's always looking to learn from whatever story they're reading, today we're going to look at contrast and contradictions. There are many notice and note strategies, well, many, 6 for this particular program. And I will introduce you to each one of them one at a time so that you can use them at your leisure when you decide to stop and jot as you're reading and keeping a reading journal. The one I want to start with, though, is contrast and contradiction. I love it because we've been looking at character. We've looked at their traits. We've looked at the character types. And another piece about characters is noticing their contrasts and contradictions, meaning when a character does something that is different than what you would expect. So often we have ideas about a character, or a character has been consistent in how they behave, and then they do something opposite of what we had anticipated. Okay? And that is a moment that we want to notice and note. We want to stop, and we want to ask a question. Why is the character doing that? You ask that in your head, and then you jot your response. I noticed that Mumble, instead of being mean to his archenemy, was kind. I think the author wants me to notice that their relationship is starting to change. So you answer the question in your jot, and we'll work on that as a team. But today, I'm going to point some out as we read chapter 6, because Schooled has many different characters in each chapter, as I pointed out. And this time we're going to hear in chapter 6 from Mrs. Donnelly. And this book is rife. It means it's filled with contrasts and contradictions. The characters are constantly doing opposite of what I would expect the average mom, the average teenager to do. And I think Gordon Corman wants to point that out. So, here we go. Chapter 7, Name Mrs. Donnelly. As Cap's caseworker, part of my job was to check in with the school from time to time to make sure he was doing well. That's how I wound up having lunch with Frank Kazaski, assistant principal at Claveridge Middle School. Oh, don't worry about Cap from an academic standpoint, he assured me. He's right up there with our brightest and best. Commune or no, he's been very well educated by someone. I thought of Rain and shuddered. Even after all these years, she had always been the teacher at Garland. For someone who rejected all forms of authority, she was a major tyrant in the classroom. If she hadn't adopted the hippie lifestyle, she would have made a terrific Marine drill sergeant. Mrs. Donnelly's impression or opinion of Rain is always humorous to me, a grown adult who's still terrified of another adult. For me, I stop every time I see that and I say, why is this character doing that? Why is the author, Gordon Corman, showing me Mrs. Donnelly's aversion to Rain? What does that bring me in the story? And I think it's to show another side of the Rain that Cap presents to us and let us know that she's very impactful. Then, Mr. Kazaski let the other shoe drop. Yet, socially, in my entire teaching career, I've never met a student who knows so little about ordinary everyday living. Have you worked with any other students from this Garland farm? Only one, I replied faintly. She had a very difficult adjustment. I didn't bother to mention that she was me. Adjustment is one thing, but Cap is like a space traveler who just landed on Earth and left his guidebook on the home world. It is impossible. Is it possible that he honestly believes bullfighting is a sport we play in middle school? Bullfighting, I repeated. How did that subject come up? His reply posed far more questions than it answered. Apparently, Cap had asked about it as part of his duties as 8th grade president. 8th grade president? How could a brand new student who didn't know a soul in the place get himself elected president? It made no sense to me. But later on, my 16-year-old daughter acted like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Duh! 8th grade president isn't an honor, Mother. It's like being elected village idiot. Every year they pick the biggest wingnut in the building. It must have seemed like the freakazoid dropped straight from heaven to fill the post. I was horrified. Sophie, that's awful. She shrugged. What's really awful is that you're a social worker with power over kids' lives, and you have no clue about what's common knowledge at the school. Did this happen when you were in 8th grade? Remember Caitlin Tortolo? She didn't really win a semester in Europe. She left school early to have a nervous breakdown. And you participated in it? Everybody did, she retorted. At least we did nothing to stop it. If you don't go along with the gag, you're next. I must have looked disapproving because she added, Grow up, Mother. The world's a big, tough, scary place. Like you don't know that. Actually, I did know that. I just didn't realize she knew it. I felt terrible for poor Cap. It was hard enough for him to come out of total isolation at Garland without having to be dropped into the snake pit that was middle school. Worse, I couldn't even warn him about it, not without poisoning his one and only experience of the real world. Okay, hold up. I'm going to stop. And actually, I'm going to move this so we can focus on our question. Da-da-da. When a character does something different from what you would expect, stop. All right, I'm stopping. Miss Donnelly, she's a mom. Okay, why is the character doing that? 1, why is Miss Donnelly letting her daughter Sophia talk to her like that? I am beside myself. I want to say, hold up, you don't tell your mother, grow up. You just don't. And then, on top of it, she's like, I'm going to decide not to tell Cap. Because she didn't want to ruin his experience. Like being the 8th grade president and asking about bullfighting wasn't already ruining the experience. I am not into Ms. Donnelly's philosophy of life right now. And I'm wondering how this is going to open up into the narrative. Where does Ms. Donnelly letting this happen to Cap take us as readers? So that's what I would be jotting for myself. I'd say, why is this character doing that? And I'd answer with all those things I just said, and probably because the author needs Cap in the position of 8th grade president. My sole consolation lay in the fact that he would have to suffer this abuse only for a few weeks more. His grandmother was recovering well. I'm sure he would have liked to visit her more often, but the facility was an hour away, with traffic, and there just wasn't time to take him during the week. Anyway, deep in my heart, I believed that a genuine school, nasty and merciless as it could be, was still better than Garland Farm. All right. She's justifying her not saying anything, and she's justifying this school experience. And again, for me, that's a contrast and contradiction, because I feel like I would expect her to not feel school was that horrifying. Besides, nastiness was relative. After school, Cap had to come home to my house, where Sophie was there to demonstrate the true meaning of nasty. She hated Cap Anderson with a passion that I wouldn't have believed her capable of, and I was her mother. Even when he did things that had nothing to do with Sophie, she took them personally. His healthy vegetarian diet she considered a slap in the face of her own eating habits. His neatness was a deliberate ploy to make her appear messy. She couldn't bear that Cap woke up early to practice Tai Chi on our front lawn. But Sophie, I tried to reason, why would it matter to you? You're barely awake at that hour. It's humiliating, she raged. We might as well put a sign on the roof that says, Warning, mutant on premises. The next morning, when Cap was performing the dance-like martial art moves by the dogwood bushes, my darling daughter emptied an entire wastebasket full of water down on his head. This she followed with a string of language that would have set fire to the sidewalk. all from the girl who was so concerned about what the neighbors might think. He looked up at her and he smiled, instead of heaving a rock through her window, which is what I would have done. Oh, what a sight he was, with all that hair hanging limply around his shoulders. He looked like a weeping willow in soggy sandals. According to Sophi, the entire incident was my fault. By bringing Cap into our home, I had left her no choice but to take matters into her own hands. Since Sophi was never going to apologize to Cap, I did it myself. I'm so sorry, dear, I said, handing him a towel that wouldn't have dried 1/10 of his abundant hair. You have to forgive Sophi, although I can't think of a reason why. All right, I'm stopping again. When a character does something different than what you would expect, ask, why is this character doing that? First of all, as Mrs. Donnelly pointed out, Cap did not reciprocate with nasty language. He did not throw anything up at Sophi. He just contemplated why she didn't like him. And then moving forward, we have Mrs. Donnelly once again putting her energy towards helping Cap. Great. But she's not holding her daughter accountable for terrible behavior. And as she pointed out, being a terrible example to the neighborhood of their family values. It's kind of weird. And so I wonder, why is the character doing that? And again, I have to think that Mrs. Donnelly is showing us the contrast between her daughter and Capricorn and the difference of his upbringing, and showing us that there's going to be some coming together maybe of these experiences and how to navigate them. He looked sad. She doesn't like me. I smiled. 16-year-old girls don't like anybody. His answer brought me straight back to my Garland days. When you're unkind to others, it's usually because you don't believe that you, yourself, deserve kindness. Don't be so nice, I said. She can be pretty mean. In her defense, she's been through a lot in the last couple of weeks. Her father, my ex-husband, his heart's in the right place, but he makes a lot of promises he can't keep. And Sophi ends up caught in the middle. Just yesterday, she was waiting for him to pick her up for her first driving lesson. He never showed. That's him. Doesn't come, doesn't call, dead air. She won't admit it, but she's devastated. He looked thoughtful. I guess when you have a lot of people in your life, there's more of a chance that someone will let you down. Wow, that's an interesting statement, very philosophical. I laughed. You're right, but it's a risk most of us are prepared to take. Cap looked dubious. He had grown up with exactly one person in his life, Rain. And regardless of what I thought of her, to him, she had been as constant as the rising sun. How terrifying it must be to lose that. I like it when chapters end on a question like that. It makes me think a little bit more. So, boys and girls, it was a pleasure to read chapter... Oh, I guess I just finished chapter 7. Here I thought I was reading chapter 6. Sorry, guys. It's chapter 7. And I hope you enjoyed learning about contrast and contradictions. And remember that when you see a character doing something opposite what you would expect, ask why is the character doing that? Because it could lead you to understanding more about the plot, the theme, or the author's message. Catch you in class. Take care. Bye.